I can still hear the sharp, infuriated laughter echoing off the polished marble tiles of my childhood home's grand foyer. It was the kind of laughter that could crack stone, and it came from my mother, my once unquestionable pillar of support. I stood there, clutching the small velvet box in my trembling hands, feeling as though the walls themselves were mocking me. My name is Delphine Rousseau, and this is where my story begins, with a proposal ring so simple it almost seemed invisible. I'd spent every cent I had saved from freelance graphic design gigs and weekend bartending shifts to buy it, but to Mom it was the most laughable gesture she'd ever seen. I remember stepping into that foyer, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it before I said a word. The chandelier overhead caught the afternoon sun, scattering prisms of light across her face as she sank into the burgundy velvet armchair that dominated the center of the room. She looked up from the newspaper she'd been reading, her perfectly painted nails turning the page. "Delphine," she said, voice cool, deliberate. "You look positively radiant. What brings you home so early today?" I forced a smile, my throat tight. "Mom, I've something to show you." I held out the little box, trying to steady my fingers. Her eyebrows rose, curiosity flickering in her eyes. But before I could utter a word, she set the paper aside and leaned forward. For a moment, hope blossomed in my chest. But then, slow as a guillotine, she opened the box. Inside lay a delicate ring, a single, unassuming rose-cut diamond set on a slender band of ethically sourced white gold. It wasn't much, but to me it symbolized years of hard work, late-night hustle, and an unwavering belief in love. Mom laughed. It started as a soft, incredulous chuckle that grew into full-throated hilarity. The sound ricocheted around me as she covered her mouth, her eyes glinting with scorn. "Delphine!" she gasped between peals. "Is this a joke? A child's trinket from a carnival stall? My dear, have you no sense of propriety?" I felt my cheeks burn. I wanted to explain. The limited edition artisan shop. The payment plan I'd negotiated. The hidden blockchain ledger that secured the provenance of every gram of gold. But her laughter cut me off. "Oh, darling," she said, still giggling, "I know you're always so independent, but this is pitiful." She shook her head, tapping the ring with a Dior manicured fingertip. "You deserve so much better." I closed the box, my heart shattering. Without another word, I turned and fled, the click of my heels drowned out by her continuing laughter. Outside, the summer air felt like a slap. I sank onto the front steps, pulling out my phone. My fiancé, Magnus, would be waiting at the cafe around the corner. I couldn't let my mother's ridicule poison this moment. "Hey babe," I said when he picked up, voice quavering. "Can you come pick me up, now?" "Of course, Delphine. Everything okay?" I thought of how he'd surprised me last month by quietly teaching himself the basics of cryptography, all just so he could keep our savings in cold wallets, shielded from market volatility. The way he'd looked at me when he proposed, his eyes full of genuine love, not strategic alliances. He arrived in that matte black vintage Land Rover I'd fallen in love with, and I climbed in, hiding the box in my jacket pocket. Magnus said nothing as I wiped my tears, but he squeezed my hand, his silence more comforting than any words. We drove to the Riverside Park where we'd first met at a blockchain conference. He parked under the willow tree, and we walked to our favorite bench. I finally opened the box and handed it to him. Magnus took out his phone. With a few taps, he logged into a secure wallet, the same wallet he'd used to transfer my engagement gift. Then he handed his screen to me, the balance. My heart stuttered. 6 figures. All in a single cryptocurrency I'd researched for months. Meticulously chosen, diversified, ready to weather the storms of any market. I looked at the ring again, then back at him. Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. He smiled, soft and tender. "Because it's yours, Delphine. Every coin, every token. It's my gift to you, because I believe in you. And I believe that when you're ready, you'll show the world exactly who you are." His thumb brushed mine, his wedding band, simple, timeless, glinting in the fading light. Tears blurred my vision, but this time they weren't of shame. They were of triumph. "Mom laughed at this," I said, holding out the ring. Magnus's gaze turned steel. then let's show her what it means. Some might say revenge is bitter. Perhaps it is. But I prefer to think of it as poetic justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city outside my apartment window still slept, its skyline a jagged silhouette against the bruised purple sky. Magnus lay beside me, his hand resting on my hip as if anchoring me to this moment, this fragile calm before the storm I knew I would have to walk into. I eased out of bed, careful not to wake him. My laptop waited for me on the small dining table, open to my crypto dashboard. I stared at the balance for a long time, letting the numbers burn into my mind until they felt real. I had spent years afraid of taking risks, of falling short. That fear had always been my mother's greatest weapon, subtle, needling, disguised as concern. I wasn't afraid anymore. I made coffee, the kind we could barely afford during our first months together. Cheap grounds, a battered French press that dripped more than it poured. Now, I could buy the entire cafe if I wanted. But that old press reminded me of how far I'd come on grit alone. When Magnus woke, he found me cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by printouts, tax forms, crypto statements, business licenses I'd been too hesitant to file. He sat down behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "Planning your empire?" he teased, his morning voice warm against my ear. I tilted my head back, smiling. "Something like that. It's time, Magnus. If she wants to laugh at me, let her. I'm done shrinking myself to make her comfortable." We spent the next few days assembling my plan. Between my design clients, my crypto portfolio, and the passive income I'd secretly been building through decentralized finance projects, I had more than enough to launch my own creative agency, one that didn't need my mother's approval or her friends' contacts. When I told her, she laughed again. We met at her favorite restaurant, white tablecloths, waiters in crisp shirts, the smell of money baked into the oak paneling. She arrived late, of course, greeting the maitre d' with an air kiss and me with a glance that told me she hadn't forgiven my quote-quote-quote budget ring incident. I ordered water. She ordered champagne. "Delphine, darling, this place is for celebrations," she said, swirling her flute. "Surely you're not going to lecture me about your big ideas again?" I slid the folder across the table. Projections, a minimalist deck outlining my launch strategy, signed NDAs from 2 major clients. She flipped through it with a bored sigh. "Design work? Cryptocurrency? Darling, no one's gonna pay real money for your little side hustles. You're dreaming." I watched her face as I told her about my seed funding, about the investors who'd reached out after I posted my latest portfolio, about the online community I'd built, thousands of followers ready to buy whatever I released next. Her smile faltered, only for a second, but I caught it. She closed the folder and pushed it back at me. "Don't embarrass yourself, Delphine. Marry well. Let Magnus handle the crypto nonsense. You're not cut out for this world." I felt a cold calm settle in my chest. Funny, that's exactly what I used to think. When I left, the evening breeze tasted like freedom. I didn't look back. The next weeks were a blur of calls, contracts, and late nights. Magnus brought me tea as I worked, curling up on the couch nearby. He never questioned my decisions. If anything, he made me feel unstoppable. One night, after another brutal meeting with a new client who tried to talk down my fees, I sat in the dark, staring at the city lights outside our window. Magnus slipped in behind me. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "No," I said, just remembering how she laughed. "It still echoes sometimes, but it doesn't hurt anymore. It fuels me." He kissed my temple. "Good, because tomorrow you're meeting with Gabriel Sterling." I blinked. "The Gabriel Sterling? VC Gabriel Sterling?" Magnus nodded, grinning. "He wants in. Says you're a risk worth betting on." I laughed then, a soft, disbelieving sound that startled even me. My mother's laughter had always meant I was small, but mine? Mine meant I was growing too big for her box. Sterling turned out to be everything the stories said, shark-like, charming, mercilessly direct. But he respected my numbers. He read every line of my projections, asked the hard questions, and didn't flinch when I pushed back. At the end of our meeting, he leaned across the table. "You know your mother called me, told me not to waste my money." Of course she did. "And yet, here you are," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. He grinned. "And here you are, ready to prove her wrong. I like that. I'm in for $250,000, more if you keep hitting milestones." When I told Magnus that night, he lifted me off the ground, spinning me around our tiny living room until I squealed. But the real victory came 3 weeks later. A letter arrived in my mother's perfect cursive, a formal invitation to her annual garden gala, a spectacle she hosted every year to parade her connections. I hadn't been invited since I was 20. At the bottom, a note in her small, dismissive hand. "Perhaps you'd like to show your friends you're still part of the family. Do dress appropriately." I almost tore it up. Almost. But Magnus stopped me. "Go," he said. "Show her what appropriate really looks like." So I did. On the night of the gala, I wore the simplest gown I could find. Midnight blue silk, no jewelry except for the ring she mocked, and the slim, cold wallet chain around my neck, hidden beneath my collarbone. My real wealth wasn't something she could see on my wrist or neck. It was an entire digital empire humming beneath the blockchain. She greeted me with the same tight smile she'd used my whole life, but I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes when I stepped through the ivy-draped archway. Magnus followed a step behind me, calm, steady, the perfect counterweight to my storm. I spent the night smiling at people who used to look through me like glass. I watched her watch me, her champagne flute trembling just slightly as I spoke with Gabriel Sterling in full view of everyone. Each handshake, each subtle nod of respect, was another nail in the coffin of the story she'd written for me. When the evening finally ended, she cornered me by the fountain, moonlight turning the water silver. "You've changed," she said, her voice too sweet, too controlled. "No," I replied, "you just never saw me properly." She glanced at my hand, at the ring she'd ridiculed, and then at Magnus, who was talking with Sterling near the garden gate. "This little show won't last forever, Delphine." I smiled. "No, but my wallet will." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't test me." I stepped closer, so close I could see her flawless makeup, the faint lines time had etched around her mouth. "Too late," I said. "You already did." And I walked away, the soft click of my heels louder than her silence. This was just the beginning. If the garden gala felt like a battle won, the weeks that followed felt like an entire war still unfolding. Back in our modest flat overlooking the Thames, Magnus and I spent every spare moment drafting contracts, finalizing branding kits, and fielding calls from early clients who'd once ghosted me when they thought I was just a girl with a hobby. I started my mornings with a ritual. I'd wake before dawn, pour cheap black coffee into a chipped mug, and sit by the window with my laptop warming my thighs. Each sunrise felt like proof I could outgrow her shadow. Each tiny rise in my portfolio made my heartbeat steady, like the hum of servers locked in some server farm halfway across Europe. Secure, untraceable, unstoppable. My mother's voice was never far, though. It found me in passive-aggressive text messages. "I hope you're not embarrassing yourself," she'd write, as if she hadn't embarrassed me enough for a lifetime. It echoed when old family friends sent me polite, skeptical emails. "If you ever need advice on proper investments, dear, your mother says you might be lost." They didn't know. They couldn't know. I still remember the afternoon Magnus and I signed the lease on our first proper office. It was tiny, one dusty floor in a half-empty building in Shoreditch, but it was ours. The keys jingled in my hand like a promise. I stood in the middle of the scuffed wooden floorboards, my boots leaving faint prints on the dust, and I felt my chest expand with something I hadn't felt since childhood. Pride. Gabriel Sterling called that night. His gravelly voice came through the speaker while Magnus massaged the tension from my shoulders. "Good work, Delphine," he said. "I've got a few contacts in New York, small startups, edtech mostly, hungry for fresh design and crypto-savvy marketing. Think you can handle the time difference?" "We won't sleep for a month," I said, laughing. "Good, that's how you know you're alive." We didn't sleep. The days blurred into nights, and the nights into 3 a.m. strategy sessions fueled by takeaway noodles, and the soft hum of servers updating our cold wallets. I remember the thrill the first time an overseas client paid me entirely in crypto. No middleman, no fees to drain my work dry. Just pure, direct value, zipped through cyberspace into a vault only I could open. One night, well past midnight, I stood on the fire escape outside the office, the London skyline wrapped in mist. Magnus joined me, arms around my waist. "Think she knows?" he asked. "She knows enough to be worried," I said. "She's always known who I could be. That's why she fought so hard to keep me small." We stood there a while, the city humming beneath us. Somewhere deep in the concrete and glass, my mother sat in her penthouse, surrounded by gilded things she hadn't earned herself. Maybe she was sipping her late-night tea, whispering to herself that this couldn't last, that I'd come crawling back. She didn't know me at all. It was about 3 months later when the first real pushback came. A lawsuit. A client who claimed we'd stolen their intellectual property, a baseless claim, but the sort of thing that could ruin a new agency if handled poorly. When the email came in, I felt the world tilt under my feet. For a moment, my mother's voice filled my head. "I told you, you're not cut out for this." Magnus was calm. "It's an intimidation tactic," he said. "They see you winning. They want you to be scared." "Well, it's working," I snapped, and immediately felt the guilt sting my tongue. He pulled me close, his thumb tracing my jaw. "Delphine, look at me. You're not going to fold now. We fight." So we did. I hired the best lawyer Sterling recommended, a young woman named Priya Kapoor, who'd built her name defending startups just like mine. She read the entire claim while I sat across from her, my stomach in knots. "They're bluffing," she said at last, closing the file with a crisp snap. "And you have every scrap of documentation to prove it. We'll countersue, make them bleed." When the settlement offer came 2 weeks later, it was for less than the cost of my lawyer's retainer. I paid it just to make them go away. I could have fought to the bitter end, but I had no time for petty skirmishes. I had something bigger in mind. It was after that mess settled that Mom called for the first time in months. I still don't know how she got my new number. Probably one of her spies at the country club. "Delphine," she began, her voice dripping with that honeyed condescension that always made my skin crawl. "I hear you've been busy." "Busy's one word for it," I said, pacing my new office, a gleaming glass cube that overlooked the city. My team worked behind me, half of them on laptops, the others in the conference room that still smelled faintly of new paint. "I'm having a dinner," she continued. "I think it's time you came back to the family table. Bring Magnus? Show him off." I wanted to slam the phone down, but instead I said, "We'll be there." Magnus raised his eyebrows when I told him. "You sure? She wants to see my ring again? I'll let her. But this time, I'll wear it with my wallet balance projected on the wall if she wants to laugh." The night of the dinner, I wore a simple black dress and the same ring. Magnus looked devastating in his charcoal suit, his hair slicked back just enough to make my mother's friends do double takes. The house was the same, cold marble floors, stiff back chairs, and art I'd once pretended to admire. Dinner was an ordeal. The table groaned under the weight of 7 courses, each more elaborate than the last. My mother's friends eyed me like I was a circus act. One whispered about that little crypto thing as if it were a dirty secret. Halfway through the meal, Mom clinked her wine glass. "Darling, won't you tell everyone what you've been up to? Delphine's got a little design agency now," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. I breathed in, slow and deep. "Not so little anymore, Mother. We closed our first £1 million contract last week." Silence, then a nervous laugh from the banker seated beside her. "Crypto money, is it?" "Clean money," I said, meeting his gaze. "Tracked, secured, and untouchable." My mother's smile faltered. I saw it, the slip in her mask. But she recovered fast. "Well, dear, we do worry you're in over your head. This market, it's so volatile." "Volatile," I echoed, nodding. "Like your investments in that failed wine venture?" Her jaw twitched. I didn't look away. When dinner ended, she pulled me aside. The kitchen smelled like burnt sugar and lemon peel. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click. "This is your rebellion, then. Crypto? Your silly design work? You're still my daughter, Delphine. You don't know how this world works." I felt my pulse hammering in my neck. "No, Mother. You don't know how termite world works. Her eyes narrowed. Don't forget where you came from. I won't. I carry it every day, I said, and that's exactly why you can't touch me anymore. She laughed, but this time there was no joy in it. You think you're untouchable? I leaned close, my voice a whisper sharp enough to break her. I know I am. I left her standing there, her laughter ringing hollow in my wake. As I stepped out into the night, Magnus slipped his hand into mine, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch at the darkness ahead. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The car ride home from my mother's dinner was almost silent. Magnus kept glancing at me under the glow of passing streetlights, his hand resting over mine on the console, his thumb brushing back and forth like a metronome trying to steady my heartbeat. The city was alive out there, drunken laughter echoing down alleys, the distant whoop of a siren. But inside the Land Rover, it felt like we were sealed in our own world, a glass terrarium holding the storm at bay. I stared out the window, the ring on my finger glinting every time we passed under a street lamp, the same ring she'd mocked, the same ring I'd nearly let her take from me with her poison-laced laughter. Magnus cleared his throat. You were brilliant tonight. I turned to him. Brilliant? I felt like I was on fire. One wrong word and I would have burned the whole dinner table down. He squeezed my hand, then let it burn. Maybe that's what it takes to clear the old ghosts. But the ghosts didn't care about fire. They survived in the cracks and corners, in the echo of her voice that lingered no matter how many contracts I signed or how high my wallet balance climbed. I knew they'd try to slip back in. And I'd have to be ready. When we got home, I kicked off my heels, padded barefoot across the cold wooden floors, and poured myself a glass of water. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. Tired eyes, mascara smudged at the corners, but my spine was straighter than it had been in years. Magnus leaned against the doorway, watching me. Do you want to talk about it? He asked. Not yet, I said, but soon. I slept hard that night, dreamless, waking just before sunrise to the glow of my phone screen. A message from Priya Kapoor, the lawsuit people again, pulling strings to slow down my licensing in New York. More stalling, more intimidation. I sat up in bed, the duvet tangled around my legs. Magnus stirred beside me. Trouble? He mumbled, half asleep. Always, I said, but I smiled because this time, trouble didn't scare me. It felt like a challenge, a boulder in the path that would make my legs stronger when I climbed it. The next week blurred into a haze of back-to-back calls, angry emails, and late-night strategy meetings with Priya. My little agency was no longer so little. Each move we made was watched by people who'd rather see me fail than believe I could win. One evening, as I sat alone in the office drafting a letter to the licensing board, I felt that old anxiety creep up my throat, tightening my chest. The numbers were there, the cold wallets, the diversified assets, the contracts, but doubt is a weed that grows in the dark. I reached for my phone and opened the encrypted wallet app. The balance stared back at me, each coin a testament to every sleepless night, every risk I'd taken when she told me I wasn't capable. It was more than money. It was proof I could build something she could never control. I put the phone down and looked at the ring on my finger, simple, unassuming. The joke, she'd called it. I smiled, a slow, defiant smile that felt like steel in my bones. A few days later, I got a message from Gabriel Sterling's assistant. Mr. Sterling wants to see you. It's urgent. That's all it said. No pleasantries, no emojis, just a summons from the man who'd put his name and money on the line for me. I met him at a private club near Mayfair, one of those hush-hush places where old money dripped from the walls like candle wax. The concierge led me through polished corridors into a dim library that smelled like ancient books and stronger whiskey. Gabriel sat by the fireplace, his phone in one hand, a glass in the other. He didn't rise when I entered. He just nodded at the chair across from him. Delphine, he said, voice gravelly, sit. I sat, crossing my legs to hide how they shook. He watched me over the rim of his glass, eyes glittering like a predator assessing a rival. There's chatter about your mother, he said. Word is, she's been sniffing around your clients, making calls, planting doubts. I felt the blood drain from my face. What does she want? He raised an eyebrow. What she's always wanted, control. I clenched my fists in my lap. She can't touch me. The contracts are bulletproof. The crypto's locked down. Contracts are paper. Paper burns, he said, and reputations? Easier to torch. I thought of my mother's voice, soft and insidious. This won't last forever, Delphine. Gabriel leaned forward, his shadow flickering in the firelight. So the question is, how far are you willing to go to stop her? I met his gaze without blinking. As far as I have to. He smiled then, a slow, cold curl of his lips that told me he believed me. Good, because I have a feeling the real fight's about to start. That night, I called Magnus from a black cab, the city lights blurring through the rain-spattered window. She's trying to ruin me, I said. I don't know how, but she's coming. His voice was calm, steady, the bedrock I needed. Then we get ahead of her. I got home and found him at the kitchen table, my laptop open, pages of notes spread around him. He'd been waiting, planning. Delphine, he said, pushing a mug of tea toward me, if she wants a war, let's give her one she can't win. I sank into the chair opposite him, the ring on my finger tapping against the ceramic mug. I looked at my husband, the man who'd put every spare penny he had into building our safety net, who'd stayed up late teaching himself blockchain so no one could touch what we built. He wasn't just my partner, he was my shield. We worked through the night. By dawn, we had a plan. It started with a simple press release, one that Sterling helped me word so carefully it cut like a blade. We announced our expansion, a sister branch opening in New York, seed funding secure, investors on board, contracts signed, the kind of news that made any rumor sound petty and small. The next step was my idea. I filmed a live Q&A from our new office, me, raw and unscripted, answering questions about crypto security, client transparency, and exactly how I kept every project airtight. By the time the stream ended, our subscriber count had doubled. It didn't stop her. She pivoted. Whisper campaigns, false tips to the tax office, anything to make me flinch. But every time she moved, I was ready. Every threat was another chance to prove I was untouchable. One night, exhausted, I sat in the bath, my knees drawn to my chest, the steam curling around my hair. Magnus sat on the floor outside the tub, his back against the tile. You know, I murmured, my voice thick with fatigue. When she laughed at this ring, I thought it was the end, like I'd never be good enough for her. He turned his head, his eyes soft. And now? I looked down at my hand, the tiny diamond catching the candlelight. Now it's my reminder. Small things can hold big power. He reached over, dipped his fingers into the water and traced a circle on my knee. So can you. The next morning, an email pinged into my inbox that made my heart stop. A notice from my bank, an attempt to freeze one of my accounts, the one tied to our new licensing paperwork. Priya called before I could even process it. It's her, she said, or someone she's paying. They're trying to tie you up in audits, delay you, make you look unstable. I pressed my fingers into my temples. How do we stop it? You can't stop the attempt, she said, but you can outlast it, and you can show your clients exactly how you do it. Another live stream, another statement, another glimpse behind the curtain. Every time she tried to bury me, I grew roots deeper than she could dig. But she wasn't done yet. She never would be. And neither was I. If you'd told me a year ago that my mother would be the force pushing me to grow fangs, I would have laughed in your face. But that's the thing about mothers like mine. They don't just belittle you. They train you to fight every time they underestimate you. Every cut she made was a lesson in how to suture myself up and stand again. After the attempted freeze on my accounts, I learned to sleep in 3-hour bursts, updating my cold wallets, scanning for digital breaches, double-checking every contract that passed through my inbox. Magnus became my other pair of eyes, my other set of hands. He'd doze off with his head on my lap while I typed, then wake with a jolt if I so much as exhaled too sharply. I'd never seen him angry until that week. He'd always been the calm one, my balance. But when the tax office opened yet another surprise audit into our accounts, he lost it. She wants to see us flinch, he said, pacing our living room like a wolf in a cage. She wants you to crawl back so she can say, "I told you so." I know, I whispered, because part of me still felt 12 years old when I heard her voice in my head, but the rest of me was steel now. I'm not crawling. He stopped, turned to me, and for a moment the anger dropped away. I'm with you. Even if she tries to drag us under, I'm with you. We kissed like a promise that night, one that said our ring meant more than diamonds, more than money. It meant we'd chosen to build our own empire, brick by brick, line of code by line of code, and no one would tear it down but us. By then, the agency had a team of 7, with more freelancers on rotation. They were young, hungry, and fearless, most of them people the big firms had overlooked. We worked out of that same tiny Shoreditch office, the walls covered in sticky notes and wireframe sketches. Sometimes we'd order pizzas at 2 a.m. and sit cross-legged on the floor, laughing about things that would make my mother's face tighten with disapproval. Memes, crypto jokes, tattoos. They didn't care where I came from. They cared that I paid on time, that I treated them like partners, not pawns. One night, after sending off a massive batch of final proofs to our biggest client yet, I stepped outside for air. Magnus was inside, debugging a payment gateway that had glitched mid-transfer. I could see him through the glass door, sleeves rolled up, hair messy from raking his hands through it. I tapped my ring against the metal railing. The street below was empty, except for a fox rummaging through an overturned bin. For a second, I thought about what my mother would say if she could see me now. Shoulders hunched in a thrift store coat, exhausted but glowing from the inside out. I think she would have laughed, and I think that laugh would have pushed me even higher. The next morning, Priya called with news. The tax review came back clean, she said. They found nothing. They always find something, Delphine. But you were too airtight. They're backing off, at least for now. I sagged against the wall of the office, Magnus beside me, eavesdropping shamelessly. So we're free? Free? Never. But you've proven you can't be rattled. They'll think twice before they try again. When I hung up, Magnus whooped so loud the entire team looked up from their screens. We should celebrate, he said, pulling me in for a hug that smelled like coffee and printer ink. So we did. Cheap takeout, cold beer, laughter that echoed down the hallway so loud the night janitor banged on our door to tell us to keep it down. It wasn't the champagne-soaked galas my mother would host. It was better. But like clockwork, the next move came. A gossip site ran an anonymous tip, some drivel about my agency being a front for crypto fraud. A hit piece, full of factual errors and half-truths that would have made me crumble a year ago. This time, I didn't even blink. I called Priya. Sue them? She asked. No, I said. I'll do a Q&A instead. And I did. 40,000 people watched me sit cross-legged on the creaky old couch in our office, explaining blockchain security and decentralization in words anyone could understand. I answered every snide question, every loaded comment, every insult about my budget ring. When I ended the stream, my inbox was full of new clients. Magnus sat beside me, scrolling through the comments. Look at this one, he said. Your mother must be proud. He looked at me, testing my reaction. I grinned. She'd rather swallow glass. The next invitation came in a pale blue envelope, heavy stock, gold embossed. Her handwriting was unmistakable. Perfect looping letters that had once made my stomach knot when they appeared on a note slipped under my bedroom door. An engagement party, I read aloud. She wants us to come. Magnus frowned. For who? I flipped the card over. For Sabine, my cousin. Sabine. Perfect Sabine, who'd once told me my hair was too limp for a proper updo before stealing my boyfriend in high school. Of course my mother would make Sabine's engagement into a social event of the season. Of course she'd want me there, to remind everyone which of us had the real pedigree. We don't have to go, Magnus said. You don't owe her this. No, I said, staring at the invitation, but I owe Pime this. The day of the party, London was caught in one of those drizzles that soaked you through no matter how fast you ran between buildings. I wore a deep green silk dress and a black wool coat, The ring glittered on my finger, simple, unchanged. At the venue, I spotted her the moment we stepped inside. My mother, dressed in cream silk, surrounded by people who leaned in when she spoke. Her eyes flicked to me, a fleeting scorn passing through her perfect mask. I stood straighter. Magnus squeezed my hand. Sabine greeted us with the same saccharine smile she'd perfected at finishing school. "Delphine, it's been ages! Still doing that little crypto thing?" I smiled so sweetly it made my cheeks ache. "Yes, Sabine, and you? Still pretending you have ideas worth funding?" Her smile faltered. The people around us tittered like birds startled from a tree. The whole night was like that, a tightrope walk between old slights and new victories. My mother's barbs slid off me like oil on glass. Every time she glanced at my hand, I thought I saw a flicker of something beneath the disdain. Fear. She cornered me by the bar near the end of the night, her perfume cloying as always. "Why did you come here?" she hissed, her polite party smile locked in place for the benefit of onlookers. I lifted my glass. "To remind you I can." Her eyes flicked to Magnus, who was laughing with Sabine's fiancé across the room. "You think this lasts forever? Your silly wallets and your online fans?" "I know it won't," I said, "which is why I'm building something you can't tear down." Her nails dug into my wrist. "You think you've won?" I leaned closer, my voice silk and steel. "I'm not done yet." Before she could answer, I slipped free, found Magnus, and we walked out into the rain. I felt it then, her laughter behind me, not loud this time but brittle. It didn't echo, it cracked. We climbed into the car, soaked, but laughing. Magnus kissed my hand, the ring cold against his lips. "You did it," he whispered. I closed my eyes, the city lights blurring past the window. "No," I said, "I'm just getting started." This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe! Now back to the story. If walking out of Sabine's engagement party felt like a final door closing behind me, the days that followed felt like the world cracking open. Every time I thought my mother would grow tired of trying to break me, she found a new way to slip her claws into my life. But each attack made me smarter, quicker, harder to pin down. A week after the party, our agency's biggest client, a slick fintech startup that had doubled our revenue overnight, emailed to say they were considering other options. No warning, no explanation. I felt the panic rise in my chest, familiar and poisonous, whispering my mother's favorite line, "This is why you shouldn't dream so big." But this time, I didn't freeze. I called them myself. I asked for the real reason. I wanted to hear it, raw and unvarnished. "Your mother reached out," the CEO said, his voice low. "Said you're under investigation for fraud. That you're leveraged up to your ears, your crypto is unstable, your portfolio is a house of cards." I almost laughed. "And you believed her?" He sighed. "We didn't. Not entirely, but the whispers make investors nervous. We need assurances." "You'll have them," I said, my tone like a blade. "And then you'll see exactly how stable I am." I spent that night drafting a blistering transparency statement, line by line, while Magnus sat beside me, cross-referencing every figure with the cold wallets. By dawn, I had a document thicker than my mother's guest list. Proof of funds, tax clearances, chain of custody reports on every coin. It was so airtight that Sterling called me just to say, "Remind me never to bet against you." The client stayed. In fact, they doubled their retainer. I framed the email confirmation on my office wall, right above the ring box she once sneered at. By spring, our agency had grown so fast that our tiny Shoreditch space felt like an old coat, 2 sizes too small. We signed a lease on a converted warehouse, exposed brick, high ceilings, a battered freight elevator that creaked like a secret. I loved it. It felt raw, unfinished, alive. A mirror of me. I hosted our first team town hall there, standing on an old wooden crate because we didn't have enough chairs yet. "This is our space," I told them, my voice echoing off the steel beams. "This is where we prove we're not a fluke. This is where we outwork everyone who laughs at us." They cheered. And I thought, maybe I'm not just running from her anymore, maybe I'm running towards something. But no sooner did we hang the new sign on the front door than the next hit came. A client. An insider leak. Someone had sold parts of our design templates to a rival for pennies, hoping to poison our reputation. When I found out, I sat in the dark with my laptop open, the trader's name blinking back at me from a bank statement Priya had traced. It was like seeing my mother's fingerprints in the smear of betrayal. Her method was always the same: sow doubt, split loyalty, make me question who I could trust. Magnus found me there hours later, my fingers frozen above the keyboard. He crouched down, his hands on my knees. "Delphine," he said, so soft it almost broke me. "Look at me." I did. The room was dim except for the laptop screen, casting us both in cold blue light. "We'll cut it out at the root," he said, "like you always do." I fired the leak that night. I wrote the email myself, short and final. "Your services are no longer required. You'll find no room here for snakes." Then I went live. Another Q&A, another lesson. I didn't hide the breach. I turned it inside out, showing every freelancer, every client exactly how we protected data, how we traced the betrayal, how the system worked because of, not despite, our transparency. Spite. Each time she tried to bury me, I made it a stepping stone. Each time she tried to humiliate me, I made it an asset. Sterling called me at dawn the next day. "You know," he said, voice rough with sleep, "you've made more noise in a year than some people make in a lifetime." "I'll be quiet when I'm dead," I shot back. He laughed. A real laugh, not the brittle echo I'd grown up with. "There's a conference in Lisbon next month," he said. "Crypto, fintech, new money, your people. I want you there." "Speaking?" "Headlining," he said. "Big stage, big lights, make them see you." I booked the flights that afternoon. When I told Magnus, he picked me up and spun me around the new office, nearly knocking over a tower of boxes we hadn't unpacked yet. "Lisbon," he said, grinning. "Your mother's gonna have an aneurysm." Lisbon was warm and humming with possibility. The conference hall was a cavern of glass and steel, the kind of place that made you feel both small and infinite. I stood backstage in a tailored white suit, my ring a tiny glint beneath the bright lights. When they called my name, I stepped out into a wave of applause that felt like a tide lifting me higher than her laughter ever could. I spoke about design, crypto security, resilience. I told them how to build an empire on code and sweat when no one believes you deserve the bricks. I even told them about the ring, how something small can hold a promise big enough to build a life around. When I stepped off stage, my phone vibrated. A text. One line. "Your mother says you're embarrassing the family." I laughed. I laughed so hard that people turned to stare. On the flight home, Magnus held my hand. The city lights below looked like a circuit board, alive and humming. "She's never going to stop," I said. "No," he said, "but neither will you." When we landed, Priya was waiting with news. A new client, a bigger contract, and whispers that my mother was circling Sterling now, trying to push him to back out, threatening him with old family dirt that barely existed. I called Sterling immediately. "Are you out?" I asked. I hated how small my voice sounded. His laugh rumbled through the phone. "Out? Delphine, I'm doubling my investment. If she wants to play dirty, let her. She's just making you stronger." I hung up, my fingers trembling, the ring cold against my skin. I thought about everything she'd done, every phone call, every rumor, every icy smirk. I thought about the cheap coffee, the sleepless nights, the way Magnus never once looked at me like I was less than everything. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something even she couldn't kill. The days after Lisbon felt like breathing pure fire. I came back to London with new contacts, new contracts, and a sense of something unstoppable stirring beneath my skin. But the moment the plane wheels kissed the runway, I knew she'd be waiting. She always was. Like a storm cloud on the horizon you can't outrun. Magnus and I returned to the warehouse office just after dawn. The place smelled like fresh paint and ambition. New desks, new screens, the hum of our server racks tucked behind a bolted steel door. I dropped my bag in my chair and pulled out my laptop. heart hammering with a mix of dread and thrill. My mother's next move was coming. I could feel it in the vibration of my phone against the wood desk. I didn't have to wait long. By noon, an email hit my inbox. A name I hadn't seen in years. Ellis Wentworth. My mother's old family lawyer. The one who used to handle the trust fund she'd threatened to freeze if I ever stepped out of line. The subject line was a snake coiled tight. Concerns about your company's solvency. I opened it, read it twice, laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea all over the invoices I'd been sorting. Concerns. As if the mountains of receipts, crypto ledgers, and audited balance sheets I'd built were made of air. As if one carefully worded letter would send me crawling back to her feet. I didn't reply. I called Priya instead. Defamation? She asked, her voice a sharp scalpel. Attempted intimidation, I said, or maybe a test. She wants to see if I'll fold. Priya chuckled. You won't. No, I wouldn't. That night, I sat on the floor of our flat, surrounded by boxes I'd never bothered to unpack, old college books. Sketch pads from when I thought being an artist was my real rebellion. Photos of me and my mother, stiff and polished, both of us wearing that same brittle smile that said, everything's perfect, don't ask questions. Magnus sat across from me, legs crossed, his hair damp from the shower. He held up a photo of my mother and me at my graduation, her hand on my shoulder like a warning. You ever think about telling her off? He asked. I smiled, bitter and soft. Every day. But I don't want to waste my voice on her. I want to waste my success on her instead. He leaned forward, brushing my knuckles with his. Then let's make her bankrupt in spirit. Owen Hawks. We worked like maniacs. The warehouse pulsed with life. New hires arriving every week. Fresh designers, devs, social strategists who lived and breathed crypto culture. We built tools no one else dared touch. Hybrid contracts that blended design with blockchain provenance so tight you could track a single pixel from sketch to sale. Clients started bragging about us on forums, on Twitter, in the deep corners of the web where the real money lived. Each new deal was a middle finger I wanted to hold up to my mother's glass tower across the river. But every victory came with a cost. One night, I stayed so late that Magnus found me asleep on the floor, my laptop still open to a spreadsheet of wallets and tax codes. You can't run on fumes forever, he said, lifting me into his arms. Watch me, I murmured against his chest. He carried me to bed, tucking me in like I was made of something precious. But I knew the truth. I wasn't fragile anymore. I was forged. And then came the charity gala. It landed in my inbox with a ding that felt like an alarm bell. An invitation, personalized, gold foil lettering so thick you could feel the money in the paper. My mother's handwriting at the bottom. Your presence would mean the world to us. To us. As if I hadn't been her lone battleground for 28 years. Magnus read it over my shoulder. You're not going. I am, I said. If she wants me in her glass palace, I'll go. But on my terms. We arrived at the gala in a beat-up black cab, not a chauffeur-driven car like the rest of them. Magnus wore the same suit from our courthouse wedding. I wore a sleek black jumpsuit, the ring on my finger catching every flash of the cameras outside the marble entrance. Inside, the air was thick with silk and secrets. My mother stood near the stage, flanked by board members, politicians, the usual faces she paraded for donations. When she saw me, her mouth curled into that perfect half-smile that used to make me shrink. Delphine, darling, you made it, she said, air-kissing my cheek. Her perfume smelled like old power. I did, I said, letting my eyes roam the room. What's the pitch tonight? New wing for your legacy? Her smile sharpened. Always so cynical, you could have had a place here. All you had to do was listen. I tilted my head. I did listen. Every time you laughed at my budget ring. Every time you called my work childish, I listened, and then I built something bigger than you could ever swallow. Her nostrils flared. For a heartbeat, her mask slipped. Just a crack, but enough. She stepped closer, voice a hiss only I could hear. I can still break you, Delphine. One bad rumor, one phone call, and your investors will scatter like roaches. I leaned in, my lips near her ear. Try, Every time you do, I grow stronger. Every time you push, I learn to push back harder." She pulled away, eyes glittering with cold hate. But I was already gone, slipping through the room like a ghost she couldn't catch. The next day, a rumor did hit the forums. Anonymous posts claiming my cold wallets were compromised. It would have ruined me 6 months ago. Now? It barely made me blink. I went live again, screen shared the cold wallet logs. Explained the security chain in language so clear even my mother's oldest donors could follow. Each question I answered was a dagger back at her whisper campaign. When the AMA ended, my follower count had tripled. New contracts landed in my inbox within hours. Magnus pressed his forehead to mine as we sat on the warehouse floor, takeout boxes around us like trophies. "Do you think she knows she's losing?" he asked. I closed my eyes. She knows. That's why she's getting desperate. And I knew she wasn't finished yet. I could almost hear her laughter across the city, thin, strained, echoing off her empty walls. Good. Let her hear mine, too. The weeks after the gala blurred into a grind so relentless, it made the early days feel like a warm-up. Every day I woke to a new rumor or a cold shoulder from an old contact my mother had poisoned. Every night I fell asleep with my laptop humming on the bed beside me, the glow of the crypto wallets, the only thing steady enough to calm my nerves. But the more she pushed, the more the world saw me stand tall. My mother's circle of influence was old money, old power, old rules. The world I was building, this wild, decentralized tangle of crypto, design, and community, thrived on transparency. Every lie she spun was just fuel for my next live stream, my next AMA, my next open ledger of proof. Magnus was my anchor. Some nights, when the weight pressed too hard on my chest, I'd wake to find him on the balcony outside our bedroom, wrapped in a blanket, phone in hand, eyes scanning for the next threat. He'd look up, catch my stare, and nod like we were soldiers standing watch over the same battlefield. One drizzly Thursday morning, the letter came, delivered by courier, no return address. Thick, creamy paper, embossed with the family crest. My mother's crest. My hands trembled only for a second as I tore it open. "You're invited to a private brunch, family only. No RSVP, no explanation. Just an address I hadn't seen in years. The country estate my mother had sold to a shell company to avoid taxes. The one she swore she'd never open again." I knew exactly what this was. One last attempt to lure me back, to corner me where she could spin her narrative with no one watching. Magnus found me staring at the letter. "Don't do it," he said immediately. "I have to," I said. "Not for her, for me." The drive out was like stepping back into a nightmare I thought I'd burn to ashes. The hedgerows lining the estate drive. The rusted iron gates that creaked open like a warning. The house itself, grand, cold, beautiful in that brittle, soulless way my mother loved. She waited for me on the veranda, a vision in pale gray linen, hair pinned up like she was still 35 and untouchable. The only thing that gave her away was the tightness at the corner of her mouth. "Delphine," she said, her voice dripping with honey and venom. "Come inside. We need to talk." The dining room smelled like old wood polish and fresh roses. The table was set for two, no staff, no cousins, just us. She gestured for me to sit. I stayed standing. "Say what you want, Mother." Her eyes flicked to the ring on my finger. "You still wear that trinket?" I didn't bother replying. The silence told her enough. She sighed, pouring herself a glass of water she didn't touch. "This game you're playing, it has to end. You think you've won because of your little digital piggy bank and your children running that agency? You're not untouchable." "Neither are you," I said calmly. She leaned forward, eyes flashing. "I made you. Every door you ever walked through I opened. I can close them again. You didn't make me. You taught me what not to be." Her hand clenched around the glass. "You think those people love you? You think your followers will protect you when the markets tank? When your little tokens are worthless?" I smiled then, slow, genuine, cruel. "If they tank, I'll build something else. Because they know I don't lie to them." They trust me, because I don't hide. Her laughter was sharp, brittle. You think you're so clever. All it takes is one slip, one mistake. You'll come back to me, Delphine. You always do. I stepped closer until I could see the tiny crack in her perfect foundation, fear shining like sweat at her hairline. No, I said. This is the last time you'll see me here. You want me back? You'll have to tear down everything I've built. And even then, you'll find out I'm the strongest thing you ever underestimated. I left her there, surrounded by roses that smelled like rot. Back in London, the retaliation came fast. She leaked half-truths to every tabloid that would listen. Crypto princess gone rogue. Cullis design queen's hidden debts. Family feuds over offshore accounts. Every time a headline dropped, my team would look at me like I was a glass about to shatter. But I didn't. I turned the cameras on again, held live sessions, posted transaction trails. I made myself see-through. And the more I did, the more the rumors bounced off me, like hail on armor. One night, after another marathon AMA, Magnus came up behind me as I was shutting down my laptop. He brushed his fingers over the back of my neck, where tension knotted like barbed wire. "You're winning," he said softly. I leaned back into him, exhaustion bone deep but clean. "For now," he laughed. "Always for now. That's what she'll never get. This isn't a throne you inherit. It's a fight you wake up and choose every day." We expanded again that summer, another floor in the warehouse. More desks, more buzzing servers. I hired an old rival who'd once called me reckless for choosing crypto. He showed up with his tail between his legs after my mother's latest smear campaign made him realize exactly how hard I was to break. I welcomed him like family, because that was the point. I was building a family that couldn't be bought or blackmailed. When the market dipped, harder than anyone expected, I watched my wallet lose zeros overnight. My mother's crowing echoed across business sites. Delphine's empire crumbles. But she didn't understand. Losses are only fatal when you hide from them. I live-streamed the portfolio losses. Walked my clients through every risk, every hedge, every plan for rebuilding. I let them see the cracks. They didn't run, they doubled down. And the ring? Still on my finger. A reminder that even when the surface cracks, the promise underneath is stronger. Months passed. Her attacks got quieter. The press stopped answering her calls. Investors she once courted sent me private messages. "You're tougher than she'll ever be." One night, Magnus found me on the warehouse roof, barefoot on the gravel, looking out at the city spread below like a circuit board. "Thinking of her?" he asked. "Always," I said. "She taught me exactly how much I can survive." He slipped his arm around me, the wind tangling his hair. "She'll try again." I smiled, sharp and calm. "Good, let her. Every attack is another brick in the wall she can't climb." Below us, the lights of our servers blinked through the warehouse windows. Steady, unstoppable, alive. And above all, the laughter that used to haunt me had been replaced by my own. The market dip that should have destroyed me turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to my agency. When the old money panicked, when their lawyers scrambled to claw back every penny, my little digital fortress stood firm. People were tired of secrets and spin. They wanted someone who'd stand on the wreckage and say, "Here's the truth, let's rebuild." And so we did. I remember the day the crypto recovered, the cold wallets humming with life again. My team was scattered around the new warehouse floor. Coffee cups everywhere, piles of design proofs, the faint smell of burnt toast from the break room. Magnus was pacing near the windows, phone pressed to his ear, negotiating a contract that would triple our reach in the States. I sat cross-legged on the concrete, laptop balanced on my knees, my ring tapping against the keys. The balance flickered, then jumped. A surge so sudden it made my pulse stutter. 6 figures. 7. More. Each zero a blade turned back on the woman who'd called my ring a joke. My phone buzzed. A message from Priya. She tried to block a payment from Sterling. He told her to go to hell. I laughed so loudly the whole team looked up. I didn't even try to explain. They knew. They always knew. That summer was a blur of travel and work. Conferences in New York, Zurich, Madrid. Every stage one stepped on, I carried my mother's sneer with me, fuel for every word I spoke. I told crowds about security, resilience, the power of showing your flaws before someone else weaponized them. Sometimes, in hotel bathrooms, I'd stand in front of the mirror, twisting my ring around my finger, practicing what I'd say if she ever tried to confront me face to face again. But she didn't, not yet. The confrontation came at Sterling's end-of-year gala, a sleek rooftop affair in London, all skyline and champagne. Magnus and I arrived late, hand in hand, my jumpsuit sharp as a blade, my cold wallet chain glinting under my collarbone. She was there, of course she was. She stood near the open bar, draped in icy blue silk, a cluster of her old guard orbiting her like dying stars. I could feel her eyes on me all night. Every time someone handed me a card, pitched a deal, clinked glasses with me, her gaze burned between my shoulder blades. When I finally stepped out onto the rooftop garden for a breath of air, she followed. "Delphine," she said. Her voice was softer now, too soft, too sweet. "I didn't get a chance to congratulate you. All this success?" I turned to face her, the city glittering behind us like a net of light. "Don't pretend you're happy for me." Her lips twitched. "No, I'm not. But I am impressed. You always were stubborn." "Stubborn enough to survive you," I said. She stepped closer, her perfume familiar and cloying. "You know it won't last. All these coins, these followers, they're fickle. One mistake, one slip." I cut her off. "Then I'll build it again, and every time you'll be just a little smaller." Her eyes flashed. "You think you've won, standing here with your little ring and your digital treasure chest." I held up my hand, the ring catching the garden lights. This is everything you hate, Mother. Small but unbreakable. You mocked it, and I made it my shield." She reached for my wrist, but I pulled back. "Don't. You can't touch me anymore." She laughed, a sharp bark that made the roses tremble on their stems. "I made you, Delphine." "You made your ghost," I said, my voice low, "but I raised myself." Before she could answer, Magnus stepped out into the garden. His presence was all it took. She saw him, saw the way he looked at me like I was more than her legacy, and she knew she'd lost. She turned and fled inside, her silk train brushing dead petals from the path. That night, back in our flat, Magnus poured 2 glasses of cheap red wine and sat cross-legged opposite me on the bed. He raised his glass like a toast. "To ghosts that die screaming," he said. I clinked my glass against his, the ring cold and solid against my skin. After that night, it got quiet. Not safe, never safe, but quiet. She retreated to her fortress of old money and cold marble, and I threw myself deeper into the work. We built tools that other agencies swore couldn't exist. We secured patents that made venture capitalists sit up straight. We offered free courses online, teaching small creators how to protect themselves from people like her. And people came. They came because I never hid, because I'd bled in public and showed my scars, and they trusted that more than any polished lie. When the next rumor came, a whisper that I'd stolen design IP, I didn't flinch. I went live again, receipts in hand, trail mapped out, every coin accounted for. My mother must have watched from her tower, fuming that the old tricks didn't work anymore. Sometimes I wondered if she ever looked at my cold wallet balance, if she ever did the math on exactly how much her laughter had cost her. But I knew better than to think she'd admit defeat. People like her don't die of old age, they die from irrelevance, and I could see her fading, day by day, behind my screens. One morning, as the agency prepped for another launch, I found Magnus asleep on the office couch, a laptop balanced on his chest. He'd been researching new compliance updates, because the bigger we got, the more eyes turned our way. I slipped the laptop off him, kissed his temple, and whispered, "We're going to outlive her, you know." His eyelids fluttered. "You were always going to outlive her. I'm just here for the ride." The next time she called, I didn't pick up. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. Whatever poison she'd brewed this time would taste the same. Thin, bitter, powerless. Instead, I logged into my wallet, checked the balance, and snapped a photo of the screen. I sent it to Sterling, no caption needed. He replied with a single emoji: lock. Locked, secure, untouchable. I stood by the window that night, the city laid out before me like a promise. I twisted the ring on my finger, remembering the laughter that had started it all. Small things can hold the biggest power. And sometimes, the smallest thing is the crack that breaks the world open. I smiled. I wasn't finished yet. I always knew the silence wouldn't last. With her, it never did. My mother's power wasn't just her money or her name. It was her uncanny instinct for when to twist the knife. And this time, she didn't come after me with rumors or gossip columns. She came for the one thing she'd never managed to touch: my people. It started with a message from Lena, my junior designer. I still remember how her voice shook through the phone. "Delphine, I got an offer. Too good to be true." And then, threats. If I didn't sign, they'd tell clients I'd forged invoices. I sat at my desk in the warehouse office. The blueprints for our next platform launch spread out in front of me like a map of my veins. Magnus stood by the window, arms folded tight, jaw working as he listened to every word. "Who?" I asked, but I didn't need the answer. I could practically hear my mother's clipped vowels in Lena's fear. "A man said he was, quote, advising an old family friend," Lena sniffed. "I didn't sign, Delphine, I swear." "I know you didn't," I said, my voice iron. "We'll handle it." When I hung up, Magnus turned to me. "She's not just trying to ruin you anymore. She wants to gut you from the inside." I let out a breath, steadying my hands on the edge of my desk. Then we make it the biggest mistake she ever made. The next week was war. I called a team meeting. No secrets, no spin. I laid out every trick she'd used, every angle she'd push. Some people looked terrified. Others looked furious. But none of them left. "She wants you scared," I told them, "so she can say it was always me pulling the strings, that you're disposable, that we're weak when we stand alone." I held up my hand, the ring glinting under the warehouse lights. "This ring is the smallest thing in this room. And it's why we're gonna win, because if I can turn her laughter into an empire, imagine what we can do together." They applauded. Not polite, not forced. Real, raw, angry applause. We didn't go home that night. We ordered cheap noodles, spread out on the floor, and built new contracts, tighter than any she could wriggle through. Priya drafted cease and desist so sharp they made my mother's lawyer flinch. When the threats didn't work, she switched tactics. One morning, we arrived at the warehouse to find the locks smashed. Our servers untouched, too well protected. But the meeting room was trashed. Papers shredded, whiteboards covered in mocking words. I knew she hadn't written herself, but might as well have. Paper queen. Wallet girl. Fraud. Magnus found me staring at the mess, my coffee going cold in my hand. "Do we call the police?" he asked. "We clean up," I said. "Then we make a bigger mess for her." We posted the security footage online. No faces, but enough to show our community exactly what we were up against. The outpouring of support was like a flood. Clients doubled down. Followers donated to our legal fund even though we didn't ask. I could almost feel her fury crackling across the city when she realized the fear she'd tried to sow had become my armor instead. One night, weeks later, Sterling invited me to his townhouse. I found him in his study, surrounded by old books and the faint smell of brandy. He poured me a glass without asking. "You've become a legend, you know," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The girl with the budget ring and the billion-pound ledger." I laughed into my glass. "She'll hate that." "She already does," Sterling said. "But this last move, going after your people, that's desperate. I've seen it before. She's losing grip." "She'll never admit it," I said. "She doesn't have to," he replied. "The world can see it for her." I left his house that night with the city lights dancing on the Thames like a promise. I knew she'd try again. I was counting on it. Dash, dash, dash. It came 3 days later, a summons. Formal, gold embossed. Times A, mediation. Family only. Magnus read it over my shoulder. What does she want now? To be seen as the reasonable one, I said. She'll offer me hush money, a graceful exit, a last chance to crawl back before I ruin her name completely. You're not going, he said. I am, I said. She wants a show? I'll give her one. The mediation was held in a sterile boardroom on the top floor of a glass tower downtown. My mother sat at the head of the table, flanked by her lawyer and two shareholders who'd bet on her name for decades. I walked in wearing the same black jumpsuit I'd worn at Sterling's gala. My ring caught the fluorescent lights like a blade. She didn't stand. Delphine, she said, let's be civil. I sat across from her, my back straight, my wallet balance memorized like scripture. She pushed a folder toward me. A proposal. You step away. Close your little agency. Return to the family trust. We'll forgive the stories you've told. Stories? I echoed. You mean facts? Her eyes narrowed. You can't keep this up forever. One market crash and you'll be begging to come home. If I fall, I said evenly, it won't be into your arms. It'll be onto another idea. Another coin. Another community that trusts me because I never lied to them. She leaned forward, her perfume so strong it made my eyes water. This is your last chance, Delphine. If you walk out, I will make sure no one believes a word you say again. I picked up the folder, read every line. Then I tore it clean in half and let the pieces flutter to the floor. You already made sure no one believed in me, I said. Look how well that worked out. Her laugh cracked like glass. You'll regret this. I stood. Maybe, but you'll regret me more. Outside, the city smelled like rain and electricity. Magnus waited by the curb, leaning against our battered Land Rover like he was born to be my shield. She offer you the crown back? He asked. She offered me a cage, I said. I gave it back. He kissed my temple, the ring cool where his fingers brushed it. Ready to go home, Wallet Girl? I laughed. Ready to build another kingdom. The next day, I logged in to find the markets dipping again. Headlines screamed, Crypto collapse, Design Queen's empire on the brink. I went live before lunch, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. I showed every loss, every risk hedge, every plan. I told my people the truth. They stayed. That night, I lay awake with Magnus breathing steady beside me, the ring glinting on my hand under the street lamp glow. Small, unbreakable. A promise that no crown could replace. I wasn't finished. Not even close. If there's one thing my mother never understood, it's that trust is stronger than money when the storms come. The week after I tore her offer in half, the market dipped even harder. Wallets emptied overnight. So many people I'd grown up watching, men in tailored suits with glass towers and million-pound cars, vanished like vapor when the numbers turned red. But my people? They didn't run. They showed up at our warehouse with flasks of coffee, laptops in hand, sleeves rolled up. Lena, my junior designer, brought her dog. Priya moved her entire legal team into our back meeting room, their voices echoing down the hall as they prepped statements to swat away the vultures picking at our edges. Magnus barely slept. He kept the servers humming, cross-checked every wallet ledger twice a day, and still found time to hold me when I stumbled into the office at dawn, bleary-eyed but burning inside. I live-streamed every day, not just numbers, people. We showed the work we were doing for clients we'd taken on for free, just to keep their businesses afloat. We ran community Q&As about new blockchains, design security, and resilience. We made the same people my mother called parasites feel like shareholders in our survival. And when the dip bottomed out, something strange happened. We didn't collapse. We grew. One night, just past 3 a.m., I sat at my desk staring at the balance in our cold wallets. Less than it had been, but more than enough to hold. Magnus, half asleep on the floor with his head on my foot, mumbled, "We're gonna outlast them all, aren't we?" "Yeah," I whispered. "We are." Of course she didn't stay quiet. The more it became clear she couldn't ruin my name from the outside, the more desperate her attacks got. She called old family friends, begged them to cut ties with me. Some did. But the ones who stayed, they found new fire in my fight. I watched her circle shrink like cheap silk in a boiling wash. When she realized she couldn't cut me off from my own people, she went for the jugular, the inheritance she'd always used as a leash. I found out in an email from Ellis Wentworth. The trust she'd set up in my name had been dissolved, the funds rerouted to some charity I'd never heard of, probably a shell for her own tax write-offs. I stared at that email, numb at first. Then I laughed. The inheritance was always her trump card, but by then I was wealthier than she'd ever imagined. Not just in crypto or contracts, but in people, in loyalty, in the quiet power of having nothing left for her to dangle over my head. I called Sterling the next day. He didn't even let me get through my explanation before he barked a laugh. "She thinks this changes anything," he said. "She just freed you. Congratulations, Delphine. You're untethered." And that's when I realized it. The thing she feared most wasn't my success. It was that I'd learned to thrive on my own terms. That the daughter she'd tried to mold into a trophy had become a mirror she couldn't stand to look at. Months passed. The market crawled back. Our agency doubled in size. We added a full-time security wing, vetted every contract, every investor, every rumor at the root. No more leaks. No more cracks for her to slip through. Magnus and I moved into a bigger flat, but I kept the old ring. I wore it to every meeting, every pitch, every stage. It became a signature, a reminder that no diamond she could buy for me would ever shine brighter than the one I'd chosen for myself. The last time she tried to pull me back, it came as an invitation, a gala at her new charity, the one she'd funneled my inheritance into. I knew she'd want me to stand beside her, silent and shiny, proof she still held my leash. I RSVP'd yes. Magnus raised an eyebrow when I told him. "You sure?" "Dead sure," I said. "This time she's going to see exactly how little power she has left." The ballroom was all glass and chandeliers. I walked in alone, no chauffeur, no entourage, just me in a tailored midnight suit, my hair pulled back, the ring glinting like a secret. She spotted me from across the room, her smile flickering when she realized I wasn't here to perform. She took my elbow, leaned close enough that only I could hear. "Behave tonight," she hissed. "No speeches, no drama, smile for the donors." I looked her dead in the eyes. "No." And I walked away. I spent the night with people who'd once turned up their noses at me, who now leaned in close, asked me how I'd done it. I watched her watch me, her polite mask cracking at the edges as she realized the room was listening to me more than her. When Sterling arrived, he made a beeline for me. "You good?" he asked, handing me a glass of water like it was champagne. "Better than good," I said. "Watch this." I raised my glass, catching the attention of half the room. "To every one of us who's ever been underestimated," I said. "May they keep laughing, because we'll keep proving them wrong." They toasted. She didn't. When the lights went down and the crowd scattered, she found me on the terrace, the cold night air whipping around us. "You've embarrassed me for the last time," she said, voice shaking. "When this market crashes again." I cut her off. "Then I'll build it back. And next time, I won't even remember you." She flinched like I'd slapped her. For the first time, I saw it in her eyes, the knowledge that she'd lost. I slipped past her, down the steps, into the city that had become my kingdom. Magnus waited at the curb, leaning against our beat-up car like a king with nothing left to fear. When I slid in beside him, he caught my hand, thumb brushing the ring. "What now?" he asked. I smiled. "Now, we keep building, and she can stand in the ruins and watch." The next morning, I went live, one more time. Just me. No filters, no script. I told them everything. How we'd made it through every dip. How we'd fought every rumor. How this wasn't the end. It was the foundation for what came next. By the time I logged off, I could almost feel her silence across the city, thick and empty, echoing in halls that once felt like cages. In the days after that final gala, the city felt like it belonged to me. The same streets where I'd once slunk home, my mother's laughter echoing in my ears, now felt like veins feeding life straight into my chest. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders that she hadn't won. The cheap cafe I'd worked late nights in, now a client on retainer. The co-working space where Magnus and I had planned our first cold wallet, now replaced by our name on the warehouse wall. I thought there'd be some final blow from her, some new scheme, one last petty swipe to try to pull me back. But it never came. For once, she stayed silent, her rage like an empty room with the lights switched off. I knew she hadn't given up, not really. But she'd realized what I'd become, unmanageable, unbought, a mirror she couldn't stand to look at anymore. Lead. One morning, Magnus found me on the warehouse roof, knees pulled up to my chest, watching the sun creep across the skyline. "Cold up here," he murmured, wrapping his coat around my shoulders. "You thinking about her?" I shrugged. "A little. Mostly I'm thinking about everything ahead of us." He sank down beside me, his breath fogging in the dawn light. "Do you regret any of it? The fights, the leaks, the sleepless nights?" I looked at the ring on my hand. Still that same simple band, still the thorn in her pride. No, because every scar she gave me taught me how to stitch myself back up. We launched the new platform that winter. It was everything she'd called impossible. A bridge between independent creators and secure, transparent blockchain design ownership. The same technology she'd mocked was now the reason small artists from Manchester to Lisbon could protect what they built. And they thanked me for it. Messages poured in every day, people telling me they'd felt powerless until they saw someone like me stand up and say, "Not this time." We took every pound we made in profit and split it with the team. Bonuses, raises, free workshops for kids who'd never seen a line of code. Magnus handled the logistics. I handled the fire. There was one message that stopped me cold, a woman I'd never met. She wrote, "**. My mother used to laugh at me too. I thought I'd never make her stop. But now she's gone, and I realize she never really mattered. Thank you for showing me how to let her become just another ghost." I read it twice. Then I printed it and pinned it above my desk, next to a photo of that tiny velvet ring box. Proof that even something they called a joke could become an entire empire if you refused to swallow your shame. My mother's last attempt came as a letter, handwritten. Her perfect cursive, each loop and flourish so familiar it almost made me 17 again. "Tired Delphine. I hope you're satisfied. You've ruined what little trust this family had left. I've lost friends, respect." I stopped reading. I didn't need her version of the ending. I tore it up, let the scraps flutter into the recycling bin like brittle leaves. "You're not the story anymore," I whispered to the empty room. Spring came early that year. The warehouse office buzzed with new hires, new deals, new ideas bigger than anything we'd dared pitch in those dark first days. I caught Magnus watching me one afternoon while I spoke with Sterling about a second expansion overseas. When I hung up, he just shook his head and laughed. "What?" I asked, suspicious. "Nothing," he said, grinning. "Just you. This. She can't even see you now. Not really, you're too big." I visited the old house only once after that. The marble floors, the cold foyer, the chandelier that had watched me crumble so many times. I stood there, my footsteps echoing. She wasn't home. Or maybe she was, but she didn't come down. Maybe she was afraid I'd laugh at her for once. I walked through every room, ran my hand along the banister where I'd once clutched my tiny velvet box, my hands shaking. I said goodbye to the ghosts. Then I turned and left the front door wide open behind me. We bought a small house in the country, Magnus and I. Not a palace, nothing grand enough for her standards, just a bright, warm place where we could grow our little patch of green things, watch the world spin by, and know we'd built something real. Our agency's name went up on the door in London, New York, and Lisbon, and every time I saw it, I traced the ring on my finger like a secret I'd never let go. Sometimes people ask me if I'd ever upgrade it. You could have diamonds now, they say, something bigger, something that shows who you are. And I always smile, because it does show who I am, small, unbreakable, enough. The last time I heard her laugh was in my head, an echo, a scrap of the past I carry like a relic. It doesn't sting anymore, it makes me grateful. Her laughter made me hard. Her disdain made me honest. Her walls made me build doors no one could lock me out of again. One night in our little house, Magnus took my hand as we watched the sunset from the porch. He thumbed the ring, still delicate as ever. "Do you think she's still waiting for you to come back?" he asked. I smiled. leaned my head against his shoulder. Maybe. But she'll wait forever. I've got my own kingdom now. And I do. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them, subscribe, and turn on notifications.